excited about the book. That's the main thing we want to do. Ultimate Course Creation Guide. Yeah, I've got the digital copy. You've got the real copy. The real deal. And we have plenty of reason for us as an organization and me personally to be interested, but our listener base, our client base, there are plenty of reason for them to be interested too. But can you just give us a couple of the interesting facets that we don't yet know? Because I'm so confident that there are some, because there's already a lot.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think that really one of the big things is moving from Denmark to the US and starting a business over here. You know, I knew one person when I got to the US, which is my husband. And I started to grow my network on LinkedIn. I had 900 followers when I came to the US. Now I have more than 10,000. So the whole process of networking when you start a new life in a new country is quite different from when you have grown up in a certain place, you build relationships over a bunch of years. So you kind of have to hit the ground a little bit running when it comes to networking.
And you have this interesting combination of pedagogy and andragogy, right? Yeah, you have been able to see the crucible where so much of the learning theory is established and proven and tested, which is the classroom or the sort of K-12 milieu. But then obviously, you know, this is not a book for you know, grade 5. This is a professional book.
Yeah, and really that transition from being really fascinated with learning outcomes in the classroom, in a regular classroom, where you have students that are not interested necessarily in what they have to learn, and then figuring out how to really distill the knowledge they need to have and how to give it to them in bite-sized pieces where they can actually apply what they're learning. And throughout that journey, I went to New Zealand also and on a study field trip and visited schools that were a lot applying the learning from the research in how to improve learning outcomes. And that whole inspiration became one of the bestsellers I was publishing in Denmark before I came over here on how to actually apply that learning theory into practice in the classroom. And so my whole fascination about how we learn, that's really what I have taken and made into how can you use that in a business and to grow an educational content that can both position yourself as an industry expert, but also really help your audience get the outcomes that they are looking for.
Okay, let me ask you a very annoying question because I understand its depth, but based on what you said, how do we learn?
Yeah, so what I found throughout my research and my own experiments in the classroom, really the best taxonomy that describes that is, in my point of view, the Solo taxonomy, which is based on actual research in how we learn. And their visualization of that is pretty compelling in my view. It's like, first, you have no idea of what you're learning. Think about when you're learning something new and you just don't know. For example, I've been learning how to dive while I've been over here in Hawaii. And at first I was like, holy smokes, what is all this equipment even? How does it go? You know, so I had no idea. And then you get maybe one idea, you get a couple of ideas. And then after that, you begin to see some parallels on how you can actually see, oh yeah, this goes this way, and that's because of this, you know, so you start building that knowledge base out, but you're still kind of in the superficial learning. And then once you get to the point where you can start to apply what you're learning, then you get into a deeper level of learning. And when you can apply your learning independently in a new context, that's the deepest level of learning that we have. So really the idea of from no idea, like you can visualize it as a step or a staircase, no idea, that's the bottom of the stairs, then one idea, a couple of ideas, and then you can start to see the parallels, and then you can apply it into a new context. So that kind of visualizes that.
Did you have did you have a certain type of character in mind before you wrote the book, or did that readership emerge as the manuscript took shape?
No, so actually, the book came out because I started helping course creators and professionals create their courses. And I quickly realized in order for me to really be effective at this, I need a system for it. So I started developing my system as I was helping my first course creators create their courses. And then I thought, you know, this is working. This I can take and put into a course to help other people go through the same process where they don't necessarily need as much assistance from me. And so that's when the course came into play. And then based on the course where I had a cohort of almost 9 to 10 people in the classroom with me as I was doing my recordings and testing the content, then they said, hey, Sophie, please put this into a workbook. This is so helpful. And that's really how the book came into play. So it was a process from getting over here, not knowing anybody. And based on my profile on LinkedIn, people reached out, hey, can you help based on your background with online courses? And I was like, sure, that's exactly what I need to be doing over here. And then building that experience and the system for it, and then presenting that in a course and having students interact and apply what they were learning and then putting it into the book. So that's kind of the process.
There's something that we've needed to make a study of, and I would like to get your opinion on this because it's clearly directed to professionals and adults. The workplace is a very interesting concept, right? What is a workplace? And every time you try to pin it down to some kind of very key definition, maybe you get an exception to that definition, and yet that's a workplace. But the workplace is where a lot of the courses that your readers are going to apply their craft, or whether that's the readers who are already professionals in course writing and they just need to sharpen certain elements of what they do, or folks who are wading into this for the first time. They think they have a course in them, and Sophie Higgins can, you know, probably help unlock that and turn it into something structured rather than a hopeful idea. But in both those cases, it's going to get put to work in a workplace. So that's really different than a grade 5 classroom.
It is. And what I have found is when we develop courses, so when I work with my clients, I love the whiteboard myself because it's about what's the overall transformation, what is the end goal that your audience is going to get out of your course that they were unable to do before. So we need to really define what that is. And once we're clear on what the end goal is, then we can identify the key steps to reach that end goal. And then when we have identified that broad picture that I like to put out as a mind map, then we can go into the elements themselves. So each module gets unfolded with it, what it is they need to know. First of all, why is it important that they need to learn about this key step? What is it they need to know? 1, 2, 3. How will they get to implement it by themselves? So a practical guidance, and then some exercises where they can apply the new knowledge. And in that sense, it refers back to when we were talking about how we learn, because that's a way to establish that structure within the modules themselves that actually help promote that learning.
Several of the things you just referenced didn't sound like online things. They sounded like the kinds of things that have to take place in person.
Well, the thing is, you can actually chunk this down into bite-sized pieces. So let's say you are trying to teach someone something that you're good at. For example, to write a business plan, which is one of the courses I have helped develop. And once you have identified what are the key elements to writing a business plan to help someone get a loan, for example, to start their business. Then you can start looking at each of those components that go into that. It's the competitor research, the audience research, it's the marketing strategy. And so you can take each of those components and then ask yourself, why is this important? What is it that they need to know about this? And then how can they implement that? And when you teach something online rather than in person, the best things or the best way to do it is to show examples. So this is how I did it. And then they can see how that was done, so they can imitate the example. And then give them an exercise they can apply. And you can then create an upsell, obviously, where they can get your individual help and guidance. But the course in itself can be a standalone, which is what I have also with this book. There's a flagship course that goes along with it that people can follow, and then they can get through creating their course. But of course, if they want more help, then they can get a package where they get some individual guidance. And that's the same thing I recommend throughout the book, that you think of the course as part of your business model. It's not just the course, but it's the course and workbooks and your guidance and your done for you services. So you think of it in several tiers.
If I can just shamelessly spruik and endorse and promote your book and your course and yourself, we'll just give everybody links to the whole lot, and suggest that they just do the course themselves. So that will be when we post. But I'd like to share too something that we've seen from the field, which is that our work frequently at Sage is that we need to come alongside a subject matter expert who is in-house at a company and pull a course out of them. So think, Sophie, about like the great veteran in the business, but who's only got 4 months left to go, and feels some kind of need to make sure that they pass on a good, dossier of lessons learned and so forth. That's too late. And one of the things we frequently have to teach these senior executives is that they have so much to offer that we could describe as a course. I mean, a course is just a formalization of the things that they know. But very few senior professionals appreciate how much they actually know, whether that's ways of working, catalogs of knowledge and information, shortcuts and long cuts and different, quality assurance processes, human instinct and professional instinct that they've developed. There are many people who can use this kind of guidance.
That is so true. And the other thing is, as when I was working as a principal, like we touched on in the beginning, when you realize how much hidden knowledge there is, it's not outspoken. It's that subtle, oh, that's just how we do it. But really the wealth of knowledge that is within an organization, it is so important to capture that and to share that, find ways to share that. And especially when you have someone who's really knowledgeable and they're approaching retirement, it's really a question of leaving a legacy for them, and also to keep the knowledge alive without having people to start all over and reinvent the wheel in reality.
Yes, a lot of those folks won't be able to cross the boundary of writing it up themselves. But I think if I can just cheerlead, it's not a reason they shouldn't just buy a book like this or even take a course. At least they will understand there is a path by which someone else could write it up for them, or that they can be a participant in a small collective that does formalize and codify the things they know and the experiences that they've gathered.
Yeah, and I think really oftentimes when I work with people, it's this aha moment, because they can be really caught up in the processes. And so when we talk about why is this important, what is the real end goal here? Well, it's learning this, this, and this. Yeah, but what's a level deeper than that? Why is it so important to keep this knowledge alive and to pass it on?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, oftentimes it's much more about also passing over the values and those intrinsic things within an organization that is not often spoken about. So when you take some time to really dive into kind of being the detective, taking your magnifying glass out of the pocket and being like Sherlock Holmes and really looking at, you know, why is this so important? What is it that people can actually learn about this area of the organization that's really important to them and that will help the people that are following to lift the torch and walk with it themselves?
So it seemed to me, please correct me if this is wrong. It seemed to me like a number of the people who are taking your guidance and writing courses are doing so because they see already, I've got something I've got to share. And they're looking for a way to put that out commercially. Is that right? Like they think, look, I've got a course, it could have commercial viability. I can work with, you know, a process and a way of course writing, produce it as a final product, and then it's available to the public for sale. Is that right, Sophie?
So that's one part of my clients that are in that field where they're thinking about how can I monetize, but really oftentimes they also think more about how can I pass on this knowledge and not necessarily as much for money. Like I've just finished working with a client who has built a successful franchise within the restaurant business and sold 41 restaurants. And then he was like, what's my next step? Oh, you know, I want to help other entrepreneurs go down the path of business ownership and avoid a lot of the mistakes that I made. And he's teaching at university, and then he's creating this masterclass as well, and the done for you guidance he has along the side, but also just the course itself as an evergreen. So he has different price points, but part of it, like some of the teaching, is really for free. It's to give back to the community. So that's also a consideration, that it's really about passing on knowledge. And then, of course, on a side note, it's nice to make some money while you're doing that as well.
Yeah.
And then there's another group of people who are more into teaching and educating and within organizations. So more like preserving knowledge and passing on knowledge. So that's a different group of people. And it's relevant to both. It's just, you can say the sales piece of the book is not as relevant if you are looking to pass on knowledge within an organization as it is if you're trying to sell and make money on it, obviously.
Yeah. Well, tell us about that world where people are trying to sell and that's important to them. You know, they could put a lot of time and energy, emotional and literal, you know, physical energy and money into producing a course. So it's a real gambit they have to play to see, you know, does the world want this thing that I think they might want? What a challenge.
Yeah, and that's why I really recommend that they, first of all, do some solid audience research before they start producing, because I have spoken with people who have been working like 1.5 years on creating this course. They're almost ready and they don't even know if there's an interest in it. And I really want people to know from the beginning that they have a good customer market fit. So that's why I recommend spending time on audience research, market research, and competitor research to really clarify the idea. And then you can outline your course and the process that you want to take people through. You can put it into a learning management system for pre-selling. So people actually sign up before you even start producing a single video, which is what I did in this process. So I had people sign up. So I knew already that I had my first cohort before I even started creating a single video. And that's what I recommend, because that's going to save you a lot of time and effort and tears if you actually test it before you spend a lot of time on the video production and money as well.
I think I can piggyback on that and share with you my experience just working with organizations trying to teach their own people. It's actually the same core principle, which is if you just assume that you know what your 20 to 21 to 25-year-old associates need and want, there's every likelihood that you'll build something they don't care about. It doesn't help them. They don't even like it. And then you'll regret the fact that you put this time and money at work to produce something that could have been prevented with a bit of research. Now, in that case, it's an organization and a captive group, so they can really research them. I mean, they can do it at the water cooler.
Yeah, and also you can think of it as creating some workshops where you test the delivery within the organization. It's really taking the classroom concept into an organization and having sessions, and you can even record while you have people in the audience. I've done that before with teacher training programs, because you then get a chance to actually improve as you're delivering. And then you can always redo the recording if you want it to be even more professional, but you give yourself a chance to really interact with your audience. And just by the questions they are asking, you will know if they are resonating with what you're delivering, or if it's way over their head, or if it's too simple. You can really, by just the conversation you are having with people, know much more about what they're at. And actually, one of the exercises in the book about that audience research, it came from when I was doing my Master of Business coaching, where we had this task of sitting in front of someone and telling something about this person that we knew for a fact to be true about the other person. And I was
you had to tell them a fact about themselves.
Yeah, that I would know for a fact to be true. And what I realized was, I can only say what I can observe on the outside. If I want to know something for a fact about what's going on inside their head, I have to have a conversation with them. Otherwise, it's all going to be assumption. And that's a real important lesson when you are doing that audience research. You have to have those conversations about dreams and desires and frustrations and fears and challenges in order to really address the core needs of the audience.
So I want to get into some of the kind of more nerdy specifics around course design, but there's still a question, I think, that lingers on this business of asking people. Has it been your experience that folks don't know what they want to learn or what they should learn? Well, I think maybe more the second question, Sophie. Like, people could decide they want to learn something, but whether or not they're doing a good job of diagnosing for themselves what they ought to be learning. What do you make of that?
Well, I think that when you ask your question or design your survey, you can ask them to share some examples of what they have done or what they see are their key challenges. So you get some different answers that will point you in a direction. And then you can have some interviews where you can go a little bit deeper, because it's true, you don't know what you don't know. There will always be blind spots. And so when you are doing your audience survey, it's also important to speak with more than one person in your audience. So have like a broader survey where you ask these questions and you get different feedback and responses. And then you can kind of, based on those responses, go deeper into what you're thinking their challenges, and then test if it's really true. And I think, again, if you think about creating an event or creating a workshop where you test, I think this is really something that's important to these people. And then you can present it, and then you will know based on their interaction with people. And that's another experience I had. Like, I have done live workshops, I have done online workshops, and on some of those, I have a screen full of tiles where I can see people's response and reaction. I can see their attention. I can see the mimic. And then on the other hand, I've had an experience where it was like a webinar where you can't see people. And that made a big difference for me. It was very difficult for me to read the audience when I can't see people's faces. And that's, again, part of that discovery process of you can get some information from your written surveys, and then you can get even more if you have some interviews, and then you can test it in a workshop or in an event, and then you will know much more.
Obviously, a lot of what you have given people by way of a guide is heading toward creating assets that are online assets, you know, video, LMS based activities that a single individual can take back and do themselves without requiring a group and so on. What are the limitations of that? What are there some things where when you see them, you just go, that is not for an online experience, it must be done elsewhere?
Yeah, so let me give you an example. I have been working with a therapist who wanted to create a 7-month program for people to help really avoid or change patterns to get more joy in their lives. And so she had, based on different types of research, she had these ideas of things that needed to go into the program. And what she ended up doing was she recorded some of the pieces that are kind of informational around these different approaches, around the background knowledge. But then she had group sessions, and you can have those group sessions either live or you can have them in a Zoom call where you have a group where you can see their faces again and have them ask questions and build that trust also in that space. So again, if you are talking about really changing the way people think about certain things, I think that in-person component is important to think into your program. So you can have those things where you're just repeating yourself. You can save yourself energy and time and money by having pre-recorded material, and then you can add those in-person sessions for those more conversational pieces of developing understanding.
And leaving aside some of the sort of the internal jargon for course creation, let me put it this way, because I think folks will appreciate that. How do you know if anybody actually learned anything?
So when you create these exercises where they have to apply it and then come back to you or hand back something, then you will know. Like this person I've been working with up in Kentucky, he had the class develop a growth plan and then had them back in the classroom for the evaluation. And so when you have those components where people actually are producing something based on what they are learning online, then you know if they actually got it. And then the other thing is, within the learning management systems, many of them you can track student progress. So there are different aspects of it. But of course, one thing is to do a multiple choice. It's a pretty surface level learning oftentimes, because you can just kind of learn by heart what it is that you need to know about this. But it's a different aspect if you're actually having to apply it and put it into practice. So if they are getting that outcome out of it, just like with the course creation book here, when I hear from people, hey, I created my course, then I know that it worked.
Right. Yeah, right. What a cool example. There either is or isn't a brand new, fully structured, properly organized, with assessments, with assets course in the world, or there isn't, you know, or there's some kind of a draft that's waiting to be released. But yeah, what I mean, in your case, what great proof.
Yeah, it is. And also for them, for themselves that they actually go through the process and the satisfaction of having something out there. And for some people, it's as simple as a workshop. That can be your end goal also with this one. It doesn't have to be a full course. It can be smaller things that you want to put out there.
Okay, well, you led straight into one of the trickier questions that I was hoping to explore with you, which is how long is a course, right? Because sometimes you sort of feel with a course, that's a noun, and it could refer, you think like, wait a minute, this is 45 minutes of, fast-paced online activity. And then the next one, you just mentioned one that's 7 months, right? So in your experience, when do you tell one of your proteges, look, what you have here is 2 courses, you've got to cut it in half and just give people half of what you have here and write a second course. How do you figure that puzzle out, Sophie?
Yeah, so that's actually earlier in the process when we talk about what's the end goal, because if it's actually 2 goals that you have or 2 different audiences, you want to create 2 different courses. So that process really crystallizes out what you need to focus on first and what's the next course. Like right now, I'm working with a hairstylist, and she's teaching beauty professionals how to build a successful beauty business. And when we started talking, she was talking about the process of growing confidence, identifying your ideal clientele, and to keep getting repeat customers in the chair. But then there's also the whole aspect of driving or running a business. That's another course in itself. So by having those conversations about, okay, so when we identify the end goal and their starting point and the key steps to get there, and then, oh, by the way, there's also this, there's also this, and there's also this that they could profit or benefit from knowing about.
Are you able to see who's reading the book? It's sold like crazy, right? I mean, it's done very well. Are you able to see who's reading it, their demographics? Is it men, women, Americans, people in Asia? What do you know about who's reading it?
So in the beginning, I had, like on the launch day, I had a funnel set up where I actually got the people to sign up through my funnel. So I knew a little bit more about my audience in that time of the process. Right now, I am getting these wonderful testimonials about the book from audiences, but I can see that so far it's mostly within the US and Canada and Australia and the UK, so English speaking countries primarily.
Yeah. Have you written it in Danish? But would a Danish audience just be happy to read and work in anything in English?
So I think because in Denmark, you don't expect anybody to learn Danish. So we start out pretty early with learning English. That's the second language that we learn in school. So a lot of Danes are very proficient in English, and they could read it. I have not written this one in Danish though.
Okay. Well, I suppose it's a limited readership.
It is. There's only 5 million people in Denmark.
And when they all have such beautifully fluent English, I mean, what's the point? There is something culturally. I'm now casting back to the school principal in you. There is something culturally about the Scandinavians that North America and I think the UK, Australia, New Zealand as well, and the rest of the world look at with some envy. Our business is headquartered in Singapore, and Singapore is always very close to the top of the charts, but they're always getting nudged out by, Finland or Norway or Denmark on something. What do you think is going on there? Is it learning design? Is it a cultural attitude toward education? Do the Nordics know something about the way to teach and learn that the rest of us have to catch up to?
Well, I think there is something structurally really in the approach to education in the Nordic countries where it is available for everybody. And that I went through my first university degree and it's all part of the system. So there's no money out of pocket. So everybody has access to education. I think that's one important thing. Then the other thing is that it's something that everybody finds really important. And I think it's when you come from a smaller country, you just know that you have to know what you're talking about in order to make your case matter, because you have to compete with audiences and countries that have way bigger audiences. So you have to make a difference. I think that's part of it.
Did you see any echoes of that in New Zealand? Because New Zealand's 4 million.
Yeah. I actually, when I went to New Zealand, I think that a lot of their attitude towards education is really to lift the level of proficiency within the whole country. And so their approach to really trying to make their students apply what they're learning, at least in those schools that I visited, was pretty significant.
Yeah. They have a further challenge, which I think is remote distribution of people. So that it's 4 million, but they're spread all over the place. I don't know, maybe I don't know my Danish geography very well. Everybody knows Copenhagen, but is it the same in Denmark?
Yeah, except it's a way smaller area. So really you can drive from one end of the country to the other end of the country in about 4.5 hours.
Okay.
So it's spread out.
Yeah.
But there is definitely a concentration around Copenhagen where a third of the whole entire population is concentrated around there. And then I think also, actually, this is kind of a little bit of a side note, but it was just some interesting research I heard around why there was such a drive for learning. And that was actually related to the way that way back when they were living out of the land and the peasants in the part of the country where they really had to work hard to get crops, they really had to be inventive in order to get anything out of that really sandy soil. So it creates an attitude towards you have to just keep going. And I think that's part of the cultural thing that we were talking about.
Right, a highly practical edge. One of the areas that we see a lot of is education in the trades. And so we have an in-house bias where we're very admiring of the way that people teach and learn in the classic trades. Think like a carpet layer, an electrician, plumbers, people who saw timber. There's an interesting culture of learning in those places too, where I think people recognize they're going to be in that work for a career, a whole career length. There is, in many cases, no formal credential. But the more senior folks have built a habit of taking somebody new under their wing and taking a very long and methodical view on how they're going to show them the ropes. I think that's quite remarkable. I would love to see, say in your work, some folks like that actually codify and coursify what they know.
I really
and
agree
formalize that.
Yeah, because it's very admirable. It's really teaching, and it is modeling along the way, each step of the way. And that's part of the whole idea and what I'm trying to point out when you construct your lesson plans, that you really think about that process of why is this important? What do you need to know? How will you get to know it? And how can you apply it? Because that is in fact what the trades are teaching through that master to student way of teaching.
Yeah, I would say if I am interpreting you correctly, you can just make a correction here if I've got it wrong, Sophie. They have a beautiful advantage in that their learning objectives are so obvious, because it's like you have to be able to put bricks in a row correctly. Whereas maybe in sort of, say, a law firm or something, you might have a learning objective, like you need to demonstrate this kind of an attitude toward the clients. Ooh, that's pretty smoky. That's pretty slippery stuff. It's tougher to measure than a beautiful new brick wall.
That's true. And then again, it's like, well, what does that look like? What does that behavior towards the client look like? So we can make it more specific and practical rather than just having a whatever attitude towards the client. What does that look like? I would ask.
Yeah. So how often is that the tricky conversation with your clients who you're taking through the process?
Yeah, that's often the client part of the conversation is, well, what does that look like? Because I will keep asking until I understand. And that's the benefit of me just being a learning expert, that I really put myself in the eye of the learner. So, or in that perspective, like, do I understand this? You know, if I have no knowledge, just like with the beauty professional, I have no idea how to make hair extension and all these things that she's talking about. So it's very easy for me to then, well, what does that mean? So what does that look like? Tell me more. So it's really about pursuing until now I get it. Okay, thank you. We have something to work with here.
Okay, this is actually really, there's something a little profound about what you just shared, which is that someone might think that the craft you're describing requires two camps of knowledge. You have to be an expert in course writing, and you have to be an expert in the subject upon which the course is being written. But I hear you saying no, and that actually it may even be to somebody's advantage not to have entry into the material ahead of time.
Yeah, and it really comes back to when I was working in the education system, where I was a teacher trainer. I was teaching from teachers from every different subject matter on how to teach, because there are some principles in the art of teaching that's really important. And the most important thing I learned throughout that whole process was, how does this look like from the student's perspective? How will they ever get to learn this? And sometimes it's even easier for me to say and ask these questions when I don't know anything about it, because it's like, you gotta help me and take me by the hand so I can get one idea, and then I can get a couple of ideas, and then I can start to see the similarities. And then on the other hand, of course, sometimes, like when I'm working with clients who are in business development, in leadership, in organizational development, I can ask a different type of questions because I have a background within that area that also can challenge. But I think my task first and foremost is to be the student eye on this whole course that they are creating. Because if it makes sense to someone outside of the craft, then it's going to make sense, a lot of sense, to people who can relate to it.
It's very cool. You're very bright, Sophie. It's fun to speak with you, because I can tell you don't have to generate any interest in this topic for yourself. You clearly love doing it.
I love learning, and I really, really love working with my clients. I learned so much.
Yeah, you must. I mean, even just from a breadth of subject matter, it must be quite a learning journey each time a new client comes through with. I mean, what you just the things you've shared. You got a client in Kentucky. You've got somebody in beauty products. You're talking about, how do you learn diving? Incredible natural diversity just by nature of your work.
Yeah, and I find that really fascinating. And I think that's why I'm into martial arts as well, because there's always something new to learn.
Tell me about that.
So right now I'm practicing for my 4th degree black belt, and I have been on that journey for 17 years.
In which martial art are you training?
American Kempo karate. And so that's
American
also how
Kimbo karate. There's an old tradition of that in Hawaii, isn't there?
he actually the founder was from Hawaii, Mr. Ed Parker.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, that's right. By memory,
And
that's
from
right.
actually this a little bit of a rough neighborhood that we're in right now.
Just for practical purposes.
Yes.
Well, you would maybe not be surprised to know that, we're coming up to about 60 authors that we've interviewed. And a number of them, a surprising number of them, have martial arts in their background.
Is that right? That's interesting.
Yeah, yeah. It's just guesswork, but I think there's something about having martial arts in the background that creates enough discipline and structure in your life that you also think, maybe I'll write a book. But also a lot of these folks, they wrestle with problems, or they spar with problems, let's say. And there's something, they always have like a real reverence for the inexhaustible depth of learning in martial arts. There's something deeply true about them. It's like great literature or something.
Yeah, and the thing with martial arts is you get proof of your ability right there when you're on the mat. You cannot fake it. You cannot hide it. You cannot pretend. It's going to show. And I think that's part of the beauty.
Yeah, and constantly being humbled, right? There's little to no room, and unless you've made the mistake of of not challenging yourself with good enough opponents. But then your humbling is just waiting, right? It's waiting as soon as you go into some other dojo or roll on a mat with some new group of characters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the other great test is actually when you meet a white belt. It's like you have to be extra on your toes because they have no control.
Oh, there's another lovely thing. I think you'd appreciate this. My martial art that I know best is boxing, but I've taken up jujitsu because it's a little more chess-like and a little gentler on the strikes. You can see that a natural level of knowledge is obtained when somebody's capable of explaining. So there are plenty of people who can execute. But if they're asked to just explain how it works, either their explanation causes greater confusion, or they just can't come up with it at all, or it takes ages. But that's really that's another kind of amazing proof of knowledge, which is somebody who can just explain in simple but deadly accurate terms, like this is the mechanics and the purpose of the following maneuver. I think that's real understanding.
It is. And actually, back to research and how we learn, that's the highest level when you teach someone something else, when you're able to do that. That is the highest level of understanding, because you can not only apply it, you can also actually explain it in a practical, relatable manner that people can actually understand.
Yeah, that's maybe one of my critiques, one of our in-house critiques on Bloom's taxonomy, is that that isn't exactly captured perfectly at one of those levels, and we think it's such a established old proof of understanding. Actually, that's one of his terms. I should watch that, but it's such an important convention in the way that learning ladders up that it should almost get its own layer.
Yeah, I really agree. And that's why I actually prefer solo taxonomy over Bloom.
Yeah.
Because I like the way that it really has the highest level is when you're able to apply in a new context, where when you talk about Bloom and analyzing is pretty low on Bloom's. And actually, in my point of view, you have to understand something really well in order to really analyze it. So that's another little twist on that one.
Yes. One of our learning heroes, educational heroes, is Lord Baden-Powell, who was the founder of the scouting movement. And the badging system is kind of very early gamification. But if you look at all of the way that those learning objectives are set forward, you can turn things upside down. There's no expectation that you have to go through any one step or another. It's like, look, can you light a fire with wet wood and only 2 matches? And if you can, like, nobody needs to take any courses on anything. Like, way to go. Perfect proof.
Yeah, I actually was a scout also in my early years.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
And it is true that you have all those building blocks, really. And I think
yes,
it's part of that practical approach to tying a knot, to building a fire, to building a bivouac, to whatever it is, that there's a practical component to it. And really back to the trades, it's something where you can see, I actually really need to know how to do this in order to have a better night's sleep out here in the wet and rainy Denmark or wherever you're at.
Yes. And I think he also, I say he, but it was obviously a whole movement with a lot of folks involved. But they successfully codified things like service, a service attitude, and they found ways to say, this is perfect living proof of a service attitude. And when I see it, you get a badge, and it's a service badge. And there's other kinds of service too. But if you go take care of dogs and cats in the animal shelter for an afternoon, that's what I'm talking about when I say service, right? Or if you collect empty cans and bottles up and down the highway for a weekend with your scout leader, that's what we're talking about. And it's hard, direct proof, unmistakable proof.
It's interesting because it ties back to the conversation about the law firm. So what does that behavior look like? Again, it's
right.
You have a behavior you can measure. And that's kind of thinking in those terms when you are talking about what does success look like, which is an important way to actually think about, well, so how will I know that they have reached this goal that I've set out?
Yes. Yeah. What would a cohort of 300 client-minded associates actually look like? Not vaguely feel like, but what things would they be doing on a Wednesday?
Yes. Yeah. What behaviors, what questions would they ask? What would it look like if they actually understood it? What would they say when they met a client?
Sophie, time ran out. I knew that was going to happen.
And we didn't even get to talk about the Smarter Goal worksheet, which I'm actually pretty happy about because it's about
we got a couple of minutes. Give it a shameless spruik, because here's the thing, Sophie. Give it a direct, concise description, because we'll just cut it into a short and post it. So that's your cue. Just go for it.
Yeah, so the Smarter Goal worksheet, we all have often heard about the SMART goals. You want to make it specific, measurable, timely. But the smarter is that you have to be able to evaluate and reevaluate, because learning is a continuous cycle. And that's what I really like about thinking of smarter goals rather than just SMART goals.
And it's a workbook. So when people get the book, they can literally like pull out the pencil. They can workshop this stuff on their own.
Yes.
They might have to photocopy a couple of pages so they can muck them up.
Yes, and there actually are several of these worksheets where there are small pencils that also indicate here's where you write.
That's super. Sophie, we're going to the production team usually takes a few days, but we'll make some short videos. We'll make the full length. We'll give you all of that. You can use it any which way you please, and then we'll share with our listenership on LinkedIn so that you know who they are. And my apologies, I should have shared this right at the start, but there we are. They're mainly in Southeast Asia and Alberta, Canada. That's where our two offices are, Singapore and Alberta, Canada. And they tend to be professional firms. So consulting firms, accounting firms, fund managers, law firms. these kinds of folks. Very bright, very driven. You know, I like to always say it like, you know, 3 degrees and a professional certification, and 20
My
years
people.
experience. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was thinking. Your people. And we spend a good deal of our time convincing them that they have a course in them.
Yeah.
And that they need to produce it for their people. And we do that in part because it's our job to organize the way organizations teach and learn. But we would be just as happy if they go out on their own and crack that code themselves.
And actually, I would like to offer, I'd like to help, like if you want to put together some kind of a workshop or something to help them get interested in this, I'm happy to show up for that.
That would be great, because for us, I think it's never something that feels like competitive. If a company, for example, starts working with us and then they say, we're going to hire 5 people to do learning and development, we're going to take this all in-house, we really just raise a champagne glass and go like, well done, you've finally done it. You know, you've kind of like crossed a threshold to say this is now quite valuable to you. So to that end, as much as the folks we work with want to polish the craft of how are we going to teach and learn in the workplace, we're just on side. So I will take seriously the concept of a workshop. We'll test that idea and appetite for it through summer.
Yeah, and I would also like to fly out, you know, and do it in person if that would help.
Well, you would adore Southeast Asia. Have you spent time there?
Not, and it's really on my wish list to go there. I'd love it.
Yeah, well, just to layer up a little more teasing for you, there's deep indigenous martial arts traditions everywhere.
I know, and I am so much. I want to learn the knives. I'm really.
Yeah. Yeah. So you get everything from like Thai and Muay Thai, right? The Thai traditions.
Yeah.
And then the Khmer fighting traditions, and Kali, which is with the sticks.
That's exactly what my husband and I, we are doing that.
Yeah, that stuff's wicked, boy. If you want to get your like punching rhythm down as a boxer or karate, the sticks are unbelievable. And then just to throw more icing on this cake, some of the world's best diving is all around the Southeast Asia. Some phenomenal dives await you.
Yeah, we have already been looking into that. We're very excited about it.
Well, great. I'm very pleased that we had the conversation, Sophie.
Well, thank you so much.
Have a great evening.